Welcome back in, everybody. We are diving into wealth building today. And one of the things that I want to explore is, can you do a little bit of a wealth hack by living outside the United States? One of the guys that actually comes on our regular shows quite a bit is Mr. Evan Aldo, who's joining me today. How are you?
Great to be on. Doing fantastic. Always a pleasure to be talking with you, Paul.
Yeah. So you're in Mexico right now.
I am in Mexico. Yes. I've been here for I'll be here in total a month, been here a few weeks now.
Very cool. All right. So we're going to be diving into, can you actually do international travel, whether it is temporary residency in another country, as well as trade crypto, and all of it works. That's what we're going to be covering today. So stay tuned right here. All right, we're back here jumping into it with Evan. And Evan, I want to show you something real quick. This is an interesting list of, by the way, before we jump into that, I want to jump into Evan's channel because I want everybody to kind of take a look at where you can find Mr. Evan Aldo. This is the guy. He does quite a bit in terms of trading, as well as all sorts of videos around your course. And it's a breakdown. But what is this, man? You've got a feeling stuck video here. I like this. Is this expanding the content? What's going on?
Well, I do vlogs from time to time and a little bit of self-improvement stuff. I talk about other things other than crypto, which surprisingly a lot of people want to hear about because, when you're a TA channel, a lot of people say, I already know how to do TA. I can do TA myself. I'm looking for something else sometimes. So, yeah.
Well, I think the key is right now with the markets, Jesus, my God, we got to talk about that before we get into going into other countries. Bitcoin over 10, what was its high yesterday?
103, I think we hit.
Yeah. 103 yesterday. Looks like it closed at 103,253. Mm-hmm. And its low was 96,888 on the previous night before. So a huge pump on the Bitcoin market. First of all, I want to get a framework of when you're traveling internationally and people ask you questions like, what do you do for a living? What do you say? I'm a crypto trader. What do you say?
Typically, people don't really, it depends, what type of people you're talking to. I usually say data analytics, finance, studying charts and doing trading and long-term investing. Sometimes crypto trading doesn't come off in the best way. Sometimes, and one of the things you got to realize in some of these countries, crypto maybe not the best word to use in certain places, especially places that may have a little bit more of a safety risk or things of that nature.
Exactly.
If somebody's thinking you got all your private keys, let's get them. You could be putting a target. So I keep it a bit vague. Remote working, data analytics, studying charts and things of that nature. It's not like Miami where everybody's, running around with a Rolex 24/7 and nothing's going to really happen to you. We saw what even in America may not be safe. We saw what happened with Jack Doherty the other weekend Rodeo Drive. So,
that was crazy, man.
Yeah. Insane. So, you gotta, stay more humble, I would say. So stay more humble.
Well, and I think the point, this is one good tip for all of you guys and this is really whether you are traveling abroad or looking at trying to build wealth outside the United States, is when you're dealing with crypto, you have to be much more secure because of your access to, it's just really in reality, I guess they could push you to get access to normal bank accounts too, but with crypto, it's a little quicker. It's a little easier. Yeah. There's not usually the fail safes involved unless you're in an exchange. Many of the exchanges now have incorporated a lot of fail safes, whether it's Coinbase. When you're looking at exchanges internationally, because now if you're in Mexico or Colombia or Peru, you've got the ability to get into exchanges that you don't have here in the United States just because of your IP address.
Yep.
So when you're trading like that right now, are you finding a lot of these decentralized networks to be more effective or centralized but outside the United States?
So I use a little bit of both. I mean, obviously, as you mentioned, yeah, there's a lot more opportunities outside the United States, especially for trading. And I mean, let's be real, a lot of people in the US still kind of use those options.
Sure. Yeah.
And they kind of stopped cracking down since Trump got back in office, and the SEC hasn't been as strict. So it kind of hasn't been that different in that aspect, but it is nice to, have that little leeway. But what I will say is it's even more important in some foreign countries to use a VPN, because there's even more, rates of hacking and more rates in certain places. So you still want to have, really good security. I know there's decentralized exchanges that, for example, and not paid to say this or anything, just one of the many that I've been talking about, Antarctic Exchange is one a lot of people have been using. That is still a lot of people in the US still use, but there's, it's not really like if you're just moving abroad just to use different exchanges, I don't think it's completely, worth it yet for that, because, previous administration a little bit more, but now it's not too much. It's more for me about the flexibility, the lifestyle, saving a lot of money and just exploring, different places and potentially getting second residencies, second citizenships. And there are, a lot of, tax advantages that you potentially could get into, even with keeping a U.S. Citizenship, U.S. passport. You do have to stay outside the U.S. for 330 days consecutively each year. I don't think I'm going to do that. This year, it's not really feasible.
How long have you been on the road?
Since January 5th, so 4 months. But I'm going back for the Vegas for the conference, so I'm nullifying that 330 day type of thing this year. But maybe in the future.
So if I get that right, we'll get the facts on the tax benefits here. But if you're out 330 days and you have an alternative residency or multiple, because you may have countries where you're 3 months here, 3 months there. When you are traveling right now, Evan, are you finding, because I know you've been in Asia, Southeast Asia, as well as South America. So when you look at those two areas of the world and consider the lifestyle of, somebody that's interested in, whether you're a single or maybe even a couple that are interested in maybe starting something like this, where it would be temporary residency, would you focus on Southeast Asia or would you focus in South America?
So, I mean, it depends what you're into, what you like. I mean, Southeast Asia, we all know is going to be a bit more safer, especially with somebody with deeper pockets. There's different things like that. There's other issues in Southeast Asia. More of the danger there is falling off of a motorcycle, things of that kind of that nature. The infrastructure is a little bit worse. So it really depends what you're looking for. I like Latin America. I like the food better in Latin America. I like the culture a bit better in Latin America. The infrastructure is a bit more developed. I like the ability to speak Spanish because I know the language, things of that nature. There's other things I like in Southeast Asia. Yeah. That, for example, Taiwan, I really like. That's a really, really great place. Kind of, that may be the issue with what China ends up doing with that.
Yeah, sure.
Malaysia is a really great country too. Bali, I think, is a little bit more oversaturated. But the thing, too, in Southeast Asia is that's where you could really live for really, really cheap. Latin America, like Latin America, your rent is going to be at least 30, 40 times, more than it would be in Southeast Asia. There's pros and cons. If you want to be able to come back to the U.S., tomorrow or right now, Latin America, Mexico, Costa Rica.
Yeah, you're most of the time you're in the same time zone. Yeah, exactly.
But Southeast Asia, I mean, that's a 20-hour ordeal. That's a lot to get back.
Well, let's talk about that, because value, I think, is going to be a big part of this. People who are trading right now, let's just assume that you are an individual that is experiencing capital gains in whatever market. Maybe you're a gold investor, you're a crypto investor, you're a real estate person, whatever it is, but you're starting to gain, a little bit of wealth. And one of the things is, especially if you're under the age of 40 and you don't have kids, then you start to open up the world as your oyster, so to speak, much like you, Evan, where you get a chance to go to countries and really kind of focus on that. Cost basis, let's just talk nuts and bolts. When you look at travel inside Latin America, being able to stay somewhere, because right now you're mostly Airbnb, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So would you consider getting a rental property in any one of the countries that you have visited?
Yeah, absolutely. That's what I've been looking into. Ones that are on top of my list for that right now, Argentina could be good because their economy not too
Buenos
good.
Aires, right?
Yeah, Buenos Aires, that area, or some other areas in Argentina could be good as well. Buenos Aires, I like the most. That could be a big potential because their economy not so good, but a lot of promise with Malay potentially things coming back. It is a very safe country too, especially for Latin American standards. Other ones that have potential for that, Costa Rica definitely would be high in that list. A little bit more expensive in Costa Rica. And when you look at their real estate, it's up over 10x in like the last 15 years. So I don't know.
Maybe that would be a good spot for buying a property though.
Yeah, potentially. Yeah.
So you're going to lease, let's say you lease a spot so that you have a kind of a home base in Latin America. Right now it would kind of lean towards Argentina. What would it cost an individual to do that? Let's just say a 2-bedroom apartment or flat or house, whatever it might be. What have you seen in terms of range, the monthly living expenses to maintain a property there?
So if you're just renting, I mean, for a decent 2-bedroom in most of these places, $1,000 a month, maybe a little less, like low end 700, high end 1,300.
Luxury or middle of the road?
For these countries, standards would be luxury. For Miami standards, probably just average. You know what I mean? But pretty luxury. Like you would have a pool, some decent amenities, but not like a high rise and low standards for kind of a really rich zip code in the U.S. So something of that nature. But cost of living. I mean, people will tell you on the internet that you can get away with $1,500 a month, $2,000 a month. That's if you're being very frugal, not eating out too much, not going anywhere. That nice. I would say you want to be $3-4 grand a month would be a good amount. Where
good living, dining out often, doing entertainment.
Exactly. Yeah, 3 or 4 grand a month. I mean, you want to be ideally like if you can make 50, 60 grand a year, that's pretty good. But to be able to be saving a lot of money, having a lot to invest in crypto or other things, you still want to be looking at that 100K a year mark. And a lot of these places have gotten a lot more expensive in the last 5 years, similar to what we saw in the US. Not as bad as the US in most of these places, but it still has, gone up. And there's a lot more Americans that have, or international people that have come to these places and driven the prices up as well. A lot of the locals aren't too happy about it in some of these places, especially Costa Rica, some parts of Mexico as well. So, yeah.
So around let's just call it 3,000 to 5,000 if you're going to, depending on what budget line you're on. That's for an individual. You might be able to kind of split that if you have a live-in and or a partner or a wife. So that kind of changes things a little bit. Argentina, kind of the home base potential. What would be your second country that you would consider? You said Costa Rica?
Costa Rica is up there, a little bit more expensive in, recent years. I've been kind of looking towards, there's that essential for a lease, but a lot of these countries, if you buy a property, it's easier to kind of get that residency. Argentina is one where it would be good to potentially buy a property because their values are kind of low right now in respect to everything else. And if you believe in Malay, if you think they're going to turn things around, it's a safe place. You don't have to worry about too much there. That could be a really safe place. Costa Rica would be up there as well. It depends what you want. If you want beach vibes, tropical vibes, Costa Rica is up there as well.
What about the infrastructure there in Costa Rica?
Worse than Argentina, I would say, but not terrible. That's one of the things you got to, I would say, go to these countries, spend a few months there. You want to do and kind of spend at least a month in a lot of these places, really see how things are. Costa Rica infrastructure, pretty good by Latin American standards. The tap water is generally safe to drink there. That's like a big point for a lot of these countries, where Mexico obviously isn't at that level. So you got to look into those things. You also got to look into these countries that actually allow you to buy property and it's safe to have it. Like Mexico, for example, there's kind of a loophole. Like foreigners can't really buy property. If you marry like somebody who is Mexican, there's that, then you can. But for a foreigner, usually you're just getting like 100-year lease.
100-year lease, yeah.
Yeah. and they theoretically could take it away from you. So I don't think Mexico, for that reason, is the best idea to buy property. Some of these places are better to probably rent in. Mexico would be a good place to rent in, and then it's very easy to get that that permanent residency or that longer term residency in Mexico. It's also the thing that should be mentioned too, is a lot of these countries are starting to crack down more on people staying long amounts of times and tourists. For example, Peru is very strict now. They kind of lowered it. For most people, they only give you 30 days there at a time. And if you stay over that, they have immigration checkpoints. They are getting very strict on that too. Mexico getting a little bit more strict, but most of the time still you can, stay that 6 months and then do a border run and come back. You could kind of get away with it in Mexico. And then
do a border run.
the border run, which Asia is getting very strict on that, especially Thailand. Usually after 2 border runs, so you spend 2 months there, you come back, you spend another 2 months. After that, they've been banning people permanently.
So really what you have to do is apply for residency at that point.
Apply for residency, which a lot of these countries do have digital nomad visas, they call them, which if you prove you make, let's say, I think it's usually between 3 to 5K a month is the minimum typically. You can get like a 5-year visa for a pretty affordable amount. Thailand has that. Taiwan has that. I think Costa Rica has some version of that. Argentina has some version of that. Mexico is probably the easiest because I think you can just get a decent residency if you just come here. Don't quote me on it, but I've heard if you come here, you spend a year kind of as a tourist, then you apply for it. Generally, pretty easy
you can to get a residency.
Yeah.
So, I mean, there are costs. I mean, there's also some services out there. Before we're going to get into the best and worst destinations just for expats. But, some of the services that are out there, one that I don't know if you guys follow Andrew over at Nomad Capitalist, but this guy does a pretty good job at really kind of breaking down. He's more about getting dual citizenship or multi-passport, setups. A lot of times they are with countries that have these golden passport type programs. St. Kitts and Nevis, there's a whole slew of them in the Caribbean. And then there are some other countries that have benefits from a tax standpoint. You as a crypto trader, you obviously have to worry about capital gains. Where are you going to take those? Many people look at Dubai, Portugal, Lisbon. Obviously that area has been very favorable, even though those tax conditions have changed a little bit. St. Kitts and Nevis, if you want to go there. Grenada, I've heard. There's a lot of openings, for lowering capital gains. And then I saw something just the other day where capital gains tax was just dropped in certain states here in the USA, and including crypto. One of them was, I think, it was
federal though. They're just states.
Yeah, just the state. Yeah. So if you're in a state that has both federal and state, tax access, that's kind of interesting. But when you look at that, Evan, have you considered, because at some point, you're probably going to want to take capital gains on some crypto. What would be your strategy?
So the thing that you want to realize too, and as you mentioned, obviously Dubai, a lot of these places do not have capital gains taxes, but as a US citizen, you're still supposed to pay that back to your federal. I don't know the exact thing, but if you stay out, like I mentioned, the 330 days per year, maybe there's a 100K write-off. Yeah, that's how it is. The 100K. Yep. So the first 100K you make a year, you don't have to pay. But that for a lot of us, that's not that much, obviously. But I would say the thing that you want to realize for most of these countries, a lot of these countries that we've talked about so far, if you spend less than 6 months a year in them, you do not have to pay generally any income taxes, any capital gains taxes. So for example,
for those countries.
Yeah. So for example, if I were to live in, let's say, Buenos Aires for 5 months a year, and then I would spend another 4 or 5 months a year in, let's say, Thailand or Malaysia or Taiwan or something like that, and then go back to the US. Let's say I visit the US spend 3 months or 4 months a year in the US. I would not have to pay any of those taxes to those countries. I still would owe taxes to the US. It would be hard to get out of that for the US unless you were to give up your US passport. If you wanted to keep your US passport, the way you would probably have to do it is become a Puerto Rican resident.
Dual citizen.
Yeah. You could kind of work that into if you went back to the US where you just went to Puerto Rico for a few months and then spent 4 or 5 months in Latin America, 4 or 5 somewhere in Asia, that would be one way to kind of work that out. I don't know if you need to buy property in Puerto Rico. I think you can just rent though, but I know they are very strict on that.
Puerto Rico is different. I've talked to many people who have run businesses here in the United States and have a residence in Puerto Rico, and they move there as their permanent residence. There are some benefits to that, from a tax standpoint, but the biggest challenge has been the way of life, because there's a lot of issues in just getting things done there in Puerto Rico. Obviously, it's also dead, and even worse so than Miami, dead in the hurricane path in many cases. So they get constant peltering of that. So weather is an issue there, I guess, to a certain extent. But, when you're looking at some of these countries and you look at the easiest countries that are out there, one I want to show a list of. This is best and worst destinations for expats. And here is, this is coming over from Internations. And I want to show you this real quick. It's interesting that there's quite a few countries on here that are South American. You've got Panama number 1. Then you've got Mexico, Indonesia, Spain, Colombia, Thailand, Brazil, Vietnam, the Philippines, and then UAE. It's obviously Dubai. But they get into the bottom 10, UK. Most of this is EU. UK, Ireland, Malta, Italy, Norway, Canada, Germany, Finland, Turkey, and Kuwait. So this is interesting to me when you look at this many South American countries that have been in this top 10. Do you feel like the South American countries right now that you're going to, are they prepared for these kinds of influx of expats coming in?
Not exactly. Yeah, I would say probably not. Although, a country like Mexico, for example, relies heavily on tourism. The countries, you're starting to see it, like I mentioned with Peru, they're getting stricter on that. So what the countries will do is they'll just prevent people from really coming there. Yeah. And it's more of a supply and demand thing. Right. The demand will go down the moment prices go up to be kind of, unaffordable. And let's be real, like there's not that many people that are going just,
pick up and move. Yeah,
pick up and move. There's only so many people that work remotely that are, able to do it. And a lot of people, they even if they could save a lot of money, they're not just going to, want to pick up and move. So I don't think it's going to be that big of an issue more than what we've already seen. But you have seen, for example, in a place like Medellin, Colombia, anti-gringo protests. You've seen anti-American or anti-foreigner protests in Costa Rica as well. You've seen it in Spain too, but that's more just the crazy amount of tourism. That's not really people living in Spain. Spain is not a very cheap place to go to either. I mean,
well, it's one of the worst.
Yeah. No, it was. I think it was on one of the best, surprisingly.
Spain was number 4. Sorry, I'm thinking Italy. Yes, Italy was number 47. Spain was number 4.
There's not much of a difference between Spain and Italy in terms of cost of living, culture. It's basically the same place, in my opinion. What's that's kind of, that list is a little, I don't know if I would agree with all that on that list. But
let's go through your list. You've had a chance. How many countries are you up to now?
I don't know an exact number, but obviously in the double digits of countries. I don't have any crazy. I'm not trying to go to, crazy.
You don't have a goal of 55 countries?
Yeah. There's only a few more. I'm going to go to Ecuador at one point, Paraguay at one point, probably Brazil, and probably, South Korea, Japan. And then after that, I think I've been everywhere I want to go.
What do you feel is, and you kind of mentioned South America still, with Argentina and Costa Rica as your top 2. Outside, once you get into Southeast Asia, what would you put number 1 and 2 there?
So I got a list here that I wrote out. So Southeast Asia. So favorite countries here would be Thailand, Malaysia, Taiwan would be the top 3 in Southeast Asia.
Okay.
A lot of people like Bali. It depends what you like. I don't like Bali too much. I think it's just oversaturated. Too many foreigners. It's just you're hard to move around, walk. There's so many motorcycles. There's always motorcycle accidents there. The infrastructure is pretty terrible. So I don't like Bali for that reason, but a lot of people love it. So,
But Thailand, number 1.
Thailand, I wouldn't say it would be a close between Thailand. It has the infrastructure. It's a little bit more developed. It's wealthier than a lot more of Southeast Asia. So other than Singapore, really the wealthiest countries in Southeast Asia, I believe it's Malaysia, which is really up there. So it's a conservative culture in Malaysia. It depends, what you like. Malaysia is cheaper than Thailand too, I would say. That's like, if you want a place that's great infrastructure, feels very developed, and is very, very cheap, you're not going to find any place in the world, I think, that would be better than Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. That's really high up there. I really like it. A close rival in Southeast Asia I really like would be probably Bangkok, Thailand. It's hard to find, those nice high rises. It feels really developed in a lot of parts of Bangkok, Thailand. There's a lot of craziness in that city as well, but very developed, still very affordable. So a really good place. The food in both of these places, I think, is very good, especially Bangkok, especially Kuala Lumpur. Some people don't care about the food. Some people care a lot about it. Both of those places are pretty easy to get a residency. Malaysia, I think you have to invest 200 grand, I believe, minimum, buy a condo in like Kuala Lumpur, and then you get basically permanent residency or a residency for a long time from there. I don't think there's a requirement for living there a certain time of the year. I would recommend at least live there, 3-4 months of the year if you're going to buy a condo there. That would make sense. Thailand is pretty similar. They have a good digital nomad visa. So if you could just prove you make 3, 4, 5 grand a year, then you can get that kind of digital nomad visa. One that I think is very underrated in Southeast Asia, if you're looking for a place that's only a little bit more expensive, maybe 20, 30, 40% more expensive, but has really good infrastructure, very, very developed, excellent food. Taiwan I was very impressed with Taiwan. That's easy to get a residency too. If you could just prove you make like 5 grand a month or something, so nothing crazy, very easy to get a digital nomad visa for Taiwan. I was very impressed with that. It's going to be more expensive than somewhere like a Kuala Lumpur or somewhere like a Bangkok, but for what you're paying for, you get a lot out of that. And easy to fly there directly. You could fly there directly from New York City. So just easier. It's a long flight, probably 14 hours, but easier than, 20-hour ordeal where you have to stop somewhere in the Middle East on your way to Southeast Asia. So those are my top 3. If I were to,
I like that group, and I like your reasoning as to why you would go with each one of those. Let's talk a little bit about the finances side of things. Mm-hmm. And what I mean by that is, how are you managing to pay for things, making sure that you've got, an inflow of cash to be able to handle your expenses? Are you just running everything on credit cards and just keeping a U.S. bank account? What's the model?
Yeah, it is exactly that. I mean, I'm going to use credit cards whenever I can. A pro tip for people, I didn't know about this at first, but if you have a Schwab checking account, that's the only one that is like 0 foreign transaction fees for getting money out at an ATM machine. They reimburse the fees, which the fees in some of these countries are a lot. They'll charge you, $10 every time you try to withdraw $100 for, spending money like that. So currently I do not have any foreign bank accounts. If I wanted to get one of these residencies, I believe I would have to
start setting up.
Start setting up a foreign bank account.
So Schwab checking account is the one to go with for low fees on international.
Just withdrawing money. They reimburse you a lot, especially like I know Argentina has like crazy high fees because their inflation is so bad. The funny thing is you go to an ATM in a lot of Buenos Aires and you withdraw the equivalent of, let's say, $100. They give you $101 bills and you can't fit it in your wallet. That's how bad they haven't like gotten, you know what I mean? They have bigger bills now, but they haven't completely recirculated yet. Yeah, so it's first time you're going to an ATM there.
Is cash even used a lot in these countries, or are you finding credit is mostly the route to take?
So in a lot of Southeast Asia, they're only going to take cash in a lot of places. Mexico as well. Mexico and more of the tourist places, they will take credit card, but they will have added fees sometimes. And then the west coast of Mexico, for some reason, it's a big kind of cash place. For obvious reasons, they want to mainly take cash when they can because there's less fees. So you will run into that a lot. But anything high end, anything where you're spending anything close to, a Western price for something, they will definitely take credit cards.
So how do you manage? I mean, you can't be going to the ATM every, day. So what is the hack for being able to keep enough cash on you without being a security risk? but also what is your cycle? Do you go to the bank? Do you just go to an ATM and
go to the ATM whenever, once a week, once every 2 weeks, get a couple $100 out. You don't have to keep it in your wallet at all times. Like I would recommend I just walk around with like 2 credit cards, $50 worth of cash or something in case you happen to get pickpocketed or something bad happens. But you're not going to run into, there's ATMs all over unless you're in some weird, place where no one goes.
And you're just pulling it off of like a standard credit card access, I'm assuming, or what are you using?
For withdrawing money
for withdrawing money. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Debit card. Yeah. That Schwab debit card is my second. And then I put the amount of money there that I just, it's kind of my second checking account, that personal checking account that I use. So that type of stuff is easy. That type of stuff is not too hard to do. It could be if you lose these cards though, if you get it stolen. Oh, that's why I always have a second
have a backup
card. Yeah. Have a second debit card, a second credit cards, things of that nature, because it's going to be hard, probably not impossible, but it's going to be hard to get that, shipped to you when you're in a foreign country. Because
exactly.
Worried about fraud and that. So be careful.
Let's talk about security when you're selecting a location. Okay. Mm-hmm. So you're going on to Airbnb most likely, or, maybe a property manager in the city if you're trying to look at more long-term stays. How did you go about the process of selecting Airbnbs? Because are you just going super host only? What's the model that you're using to make sure you got a place that's secure?
Generally places with a lot of reviews, and a lot of times you can look up or ask the host ahead of time, what's the security like in the building? You always want a place with a front desk, especially places that check the IDs of everyone coming in and coming out. That's where you're, kind of safer. That's there. The best. Yeah, that's what
Can you find those in Costa Rica?
A little bit harder. So if you're in San Jose, obviously, you could easily find that in big cities. In the beach towns, that's going to be a little bit harder. Yes, that's one of the negatives there. Costa Rica is one of the safer countries where generally you wouldn't really have to worry about anything that bad in that situation. But if you're in a more developed beach town in any of these places, for example, Playa del Carmen, pretty easy to find some place with, security, the bigger cities, then you could find something with security. But you want that front desk, that especially, checking people, who's going to come in at night, things of that nature. A country like Colombia, for example, I don't want to, offend anybody. I like Colombia, but let's be real. There's going to be more safety risks there. If you're going to Colombia, 100%, you need to have a place that's going to check IDs of everyone.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So out of all the countries that you've traveled to, where would you say that you have felt the most unsecure when you're traveling, whether it's been through the airports, in the cities, in the Airbnbs, at restaurants, hotels, wherever it might be? Where have you felt the least secure?
Man, it's tough because, it really, there's no place that comes to mind really, Paul. I've always
felt, you feel pretty comfortable in most of these countries.
Yes, I do feel pretty comfortable. I mean, most of the countries, like, for example, Colombia, well, it's more of what I've heard, but like most of these countries, I wouldn't be walking around alone late at night, things of that nature.
Sure. The obvious things, which is almost anywhere. Yeah.
Yeah.
Chicago, New York.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Even LA, parts of Miami. Yeah. I would be, things of that nature. In terms of seeing, not because I'm not putting myself in any situations where it feels unsecure. You know what I mean? I'm not really. So I've never really had any issue where I've generally felt insecure. I've always been fine. Nothing comes to mind. Nothing really comes to mind. It's safer in Asia, but I felt more, not insecure, just more annoyed with the hustling of Asia, walking around some of these streets. They kind of follow you around a little bit. They won't lay a hand on you. They never will, but they're just so...
It's annoying.
Hustling. Yeah, just very, very annoying. Some of the taxi drivers, incredibly annoying. They just won't stop talking to you. You know what I mean? It's just, some of that is the culture, that within Asia. I know when I spent my time there, and I used to spend 8 months out of the year in Bangkok, Seoul, a lot of different countries within Asia. And it's usually just a culture mismatch, which you have, once you kind of get what they're doing, it's usually not something that they're intentionally doing in terms of trying to piss you off. Yeah.
It's usually just a culture difference of how they communicate. So kind of different there. All right. We've talked about finance. We talked about your favorite countries. let's talk about entertainment and relationships, especially for guys and girls. You're traveling to these countries, you're alone. In some cases, maybe you have a partner or a travel partner. Mm-hmm. What are the entertainment options that you have in some of these countries outside of, the traditional tourist traps that are most of these countries have?
Yeah, I mean, there's tons of, if you're in a place like a Bangkok, a Playa del Carmen, Mexico, any of the main parts of Mexico, there's tons of expats, there's tons of groups. I mean, things to do very easy. A lot of language exchanges I've been to are really good if you want to learn, local language, meeting new people. A lot of people are, very friendly there, a mix of locals and, other foreigners. So there's plenty to do, and usually, quite a bit cheaper than it would be, in America. Obviously, if you're into the bar scene, those type of things, that could be found, anywhere in the world. In terms of, meeting new people, generally, you're going to have more of, it's good and bad, I guess, from a safety perspective, or someone, they think you're a foreigner, you're an American, you have more money, you could be targeted in some of these places.
Right.
But at the same time, you kind of have that more people want to meet you. A lot of people in the world want to practice their English. They want to learn English. They want to meet new people. It is funny too. Like I was talking about, you talk about like scams at bars or things of that. It was funny because I met some Americans. I'm not going to say where it was, but I met some Americans, and you would never think Americans would just not want to pay the bar tab or want to try to scam you. But I was with some Americans. We bought a nice, expensive bottle of tequila, not expensive for U.S. standards, but kind of expensive for Mexican standards. I look away, I go to the bathroom 5 minutes. I come back, no one's there, and I'm left with it. I would never think you would never think Americans would do that. You would think, why would, you know what I mean? You would never.
Of course. Yeah.
Yeah. And I look up one of the guys, it's only $250, whatever. But I was curious, who's the type of person that's going to scare? I look at one of the guys, he's living in a $5 million house in California. That's the person who doesn't want to pay a $200 bar tab. Okay.
Some of those people, I will say, are interesting because, you travel in, I know my circles, I've got a lot of people like that, that are very well off, and they're the cheapest people of all.
Sometimes.
It's terrible.
Yeah. You would think,
It's crazy. Not me. Hey, for everybody that knows out there, I will be completely hospitable anytime I am with you. Evan, last couple of things I want to hit on. Of course, let's talk about crypto trading, because that's typically a great way to earn money while you're on the road. All right. Mm-hmm. So, because in many cases, maybe you can do a digital job. Sure. There's lots of different things in whatever your gig is, whether you're a designer, a programmer, a research person, a social media person. But when you look at trading and being able to keep up with the news and just what's happening in the cycle, do you feel as locked in on what's happening in the markets right now as you were when you were in Miami?
Yeah, I do, because, that's an important question. So what I would say is, like, if you're staying in any place under a month, you're not really a digital nomad. You're just a tourist. You're just kind of being a vacationer. If you're staying at one place and you're in that place for at least a month, I'd recommend really to be comfortable, get used to the place, 3 months, 2 to 3 months to stay in a place, a significant portion of the year. Then you could kind of hone in. There's going to be lots of distractions. I mean, especially if you're somebody who only makes, let's say you make 50 or 100 grand. Let's say you make 100 grand in the US.
Yeah.
That's going to go a lot farther in a lot more of these countries. There's more, you're going to be able to go out more, do other things, more potential distractions that can happen. So I think, it's very important to be disciplined. The same thing would be said to anybody living in New York City, living in Miami. There's tons of distractions, but given that your money goes farther in a lot of these places, there's a lot more, kind of distractions. So to answer your question, yes, you can be honed in. You got to, have a place that's pretty good, have a good setup. And if you the longer you stay in the place, the more, odds of being able to be comfortable there and getting dialed in. So I'd recommend, once you know where you want to go, try to do something where you could stay in that place 3-4 months out of the year.
Well, and I think the thing is when you're traveling, I know for me, unless you're insanely disciplined, once you land in a new place, because you're very uneasy, you're trying to figure everything out. You're trying to find out where you're going to eat, where you're going to do your clothes, just everything that is normal life is now upside down. So you have a whole new set of concerns that are not typically at the top of your frontal lobe, other than your focus on your job or things like that. And I find that a lot of times, when I'm traveling for extended period of times, that usually knocks me off my game a little bit. In the end, if I know I'm going to be in France for 2 weeks or wherever, that first couple of days, I feel like out of sort. And then I finally catch up to what's going on, with the team, around research and where we are constantly. But over time, I've learned how to control that and to realize that when you land in a new city, don't let any of that stuff bother you. You have to stay focused in on whatever it is. If you're there for tourism and just enjoyment, then do it. But if you're there to become a digital nomad and you want to actually work and earn money, treat it just like the job that you normally do all the time, which I think a lot of people miss out on. They get caught in that trap of, it's a staycation kind of thing, and they lose focus on what they're really trying to do, which is earn money. At the end of the day, you're trying to earn some money. So do you find yourself earning better or doing better on trades when you're traveling like this, when you have maybe more or less distractions? I guess it depends on how you look at it, versus when you were in Miami, locked in around a lot of crypto people. What did you feel like from a trade standpoint worked out for you? This is your job, is basically a crypto trader.
Right. I think that, in Miami, you're used to the place, it's the place you've been. You kind of have your routine and you have everything. So it's going to be harder the first week to 2 weeks you arrive in a new place. That's all, because you got to, like all the things you mentioned, you got to get where are you going to eat, where are you going to buy groceries, all these type of things. But if you're disciplined, you can figure those things out, usually 3 to 5 days. The thing that you could kind of get unlucky if you have an Airbnb that's really crappy, there's a lot of noise, there's dogs barking, there's things that you're going to deal with from time to time that you'll get unlucky with. And you kind of have to maybe even switch places, things of that nature. So it could be a rough week to 2 weeks. Now, the thing you mentioned Andrew Henderson, I'm a capitalist, he owns places in all these places that he goes. So it's easy for him. He's used to the condo.
Yeah. Once you get a cycle going, in countries, then it's just a revisit. It's like me, whenever I travel, I often will stay either at the same Airbnbs or the same hotels, because I know everything around them, so it's like old home week when I land there. In many cases, I know the people, I even have developed friendships. So it's kind of interesting. I think that's one of the things you guys have to focus on if you're trying to make sure that you can maintain a job. If you're lucky enough to be an entrepreneur and you're your own boss, then that's a different kind of thing, because you're already, to a certain level, already disciplined. And that's something we're going to be talking a lot about here on this show. We'll definitely have Evan coming back in on stuff like, especially related to crypto, because obviously we'll have crypto in here. We've got a lot of other topics around wealth building, real estate, starting businesses, all that good stuff. And of course, we'll be covering all of our crypto topics, very specific to what's going on. Last question I have for you is, we got to look at a chart.
Oh, yeah.
We got to look at a chart. So if you are looking at, I'm going to just bring up the Bitcoin chart real quick. I'll just bring it on with us real quick.
ETH too. ETH is
ETH is on fire. Actually, let's start with ETH. So we've got Ethereum right now. And you look at Ethereum across this, where it is today. Look at this breakout here. I mean, we're setting it. Look at this wick up here to almost $2,500 on that wick on the day. What is your feeling on ETH right now? Are you bullish on ETH to continue this trend, or what are you thinking?
Has been the biggest jump on ETH versus Bitcoin since June of 2022. It's kind of similar to that bottom we saw in June of 22. I don't know if you want me to, I got a screen.
Yeah, go ahead and kick it out.
Yeah.
We'll use yours.
So I got my ETH chart right here. You should be able to see it now.
Adding to scene now. Here it comes. All right.
So It's similar, this jump. I'm just looking at, let's see what this jump was so far. 76%. We haven't seen that quickly, really, since could argue maybe here this March of 2024, but really it's more like this bottom right here, that 124. And if you look at what everybody cares about, the thing we got to realize, green Heikin-Ashi candle up to the 2-week, which is huge. We haven't seen a jump like this on ETH versus Bitcoin. This is about a 34% jump. We haven't seen anything that quickly since really here of, where was that? That was the June of 22 bottom. And then the bottoms of 2019, that was about 41%. So this could be a bottom. The only thing we got going against this is monetary policy, but this looks excellent as long as you could hold right here. I want to erase a lot of this pain and come back up to where we were in November of 2024 here. And I think if ETH can get up to 3,000 and Bitcoin can get up to 120K, we'll be close to these levels, which would be really huge. So
do you think that we are in a spot right now for both Bitcoin and Ethereum? Because many people are looking at this being maybe a short cycle. And I look at it, I'm like, well, is this a short cycle or is it just a new trading mechanism that we're seeing within the markets? Because crypto, in my opinion, doesn't have cycles as much anymore. There's just too many new influences coming into this. Do you feel like this just plays out with the macro markets and where we're seeing traditional markets go?
So I take the view that the cycle is still there. And I think a lot of this tariff stuff is what's made it seem like we're losing the cycle, but we really haven't yet. And I think we're kind of still following somewhat of the 4-year cycle. And even the stock market has followed that same 4-year cycle for the most part, especially with 2018 being a bad year. 2020.
Well, would that put us at the end of 25? I mean, end of 2025 as the top?
I think so. And I think you're still there because a lot of these things, we're jumping up so quickly on ETH right now. We're jumping up quickly on others versus Bitcoin, which is essentially all the altcoins outside the top 10 market cap versus Bitcoin. Now we're above what we were during, I think it was the February lows during that wick down. So I think that you can just mark this tariff thing as potentially an unpredictable event that just delayed us. And now we're kind of getting back on schedule for a potential top in December or January. So,
Well, guys, what we will do, I'll bring Evan back on this show. We'll actually give you guys some trading tools and tactics that you can use if you are getting into crypto as one of your diversified assets, which in this show we talk about wealth building. So it does get into all sorts of assets. Crypto is one of the key ones that I believe is the future of, the monetary system and what you'll be investing in the next decade. So hopefully this show is going to give you guys some insight on that, and always leave some comments down below. Make sure and hit the like button. And Evan, it's fun to kind of chat with you outside of just charting, stuff over and over as we do on the regular show over on PBN.
Great to love to be on this show, Paul. Great conversation. Thanks so much.
Yeah, excellent stuff. Well, guys, we'll catch you next time right here.